The night has a way of hiding things. When the world falls silent, shadows grow longer, and the only sounds you hear are the ones that make your heart race. For those who work the night shift, night watchmen, security guards, and those who keep the world's darkest hours, they know there's more to night than meets the eye. Strange things happen when the moon is high, and sometimes the shadows have more to hide than you can imagine. Tonight, 4 night watchmen share their most unsettling experiences, moments that defy logic and reality. Listen carefully, because these aren't the stories you hear in the light of day. Story 1, The Unseen Visitor. I've been working as a night watchman at an old warehouse for a couple of months now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills. The building is massive, full of old storage units, dusty crates, and abandoned offices. Most of the time, it's pretty boring. I sit in the security booth, watch the monitors, and make sure no one's trying to break in. But one night, something happened that I can't explain. It was around 2 a.m., and I had just finished my round of checking the back door and the storage areas. Everything seemed normal. No signs of tampering, no strange noises, just the usual quiet of the building. I sat back in my chair, ready to wait until my shift ended, when I noticed something on the surveillance monitor. A figure, just standing in the middle of one of the hallways. I froze. The hallway had been empty when I checked it just moments ago. I could see the figure standing perfectly still, their back to the camera. I leaned forward, staring at the monitor, trying to make out any details. It was a man dressed in dark clothes, but he was motionless, not moving at all. I grabbed my flashlight and radioed my supervisor, but there was no answer. It was just me in the building. I had no choice but to check it out myself. I grabbed my keys and made my way through the dark hallways, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. As I walked closer to where I saw the figure, the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I got to the hallway where the figure was supposed to be, there was no one there, not a soul. The hallway was empty. The only thing in sight was a faint glow of the emergency lights. I checked every corner, every room, but there was no sign of anyone. I thought maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had imagined it. But when I went back to the security booth and checked the monitor again, the figure was back. This time, standing in front of the camera, as if it had been waiting for me to look. I couldn't breathe. My heart started pounding in my chest. I reached for radio again, but this time I heard static, followed by a voice. Leave now. I almost dropped the radio in shock. The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. I don't know what happened next. I ran out of the booth, locked the doors, and didn't look back. The figure never appeared again, but I can't forget the feeling that someone or something was watching me, something that shouldn't have been there. And I don't know if it was real, but I'll never forget that voice telling me to leave. Story 2, The Whistling in the Dark. I've worked the night shift at a small factory for over a year, mostly in charge of monitoring the security cameras and making sure the place stays locked up tight. It's a quiet job, not much happens, just the occasional break-in attempt or false alarm. But one night, something happened that I'll never forget. It was just after midnight, and I had just finished my rounds. Everything seemed fine, so I decided to sit down and grab a quick snack. The factory was completely silent, the only noise coming from the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional rattle of the vents. I was halfway through my sandwich when I heard it, a soft whistle. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe the vents, but then it came again, a high-pitched whistle, like someone was standing just outside the door, trying to get my attention. I stood up, heart racing, and walked over to the door. The hallways outside were dark, the kind of dark where you can't see anything beyond the faint glow of the emergency lights. I opened the door cautiously, shining my flashlight down the hallway. Nothing, just the usual silence. I was about to close the door when I heard the whistle again, this time closer, from the far end of the hall. It was unmistakable, a soft, eerie whistle that sent a chill down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight tighter and walked down the hallway toward the sound. The lights flickered above me, casting long shadows on the walls. The air felt thick, heavy, and the closer I got to the end of the hall, the more the whistle seemed to echo, filling the empty space. When I reached the end of the hall, I froze. There was no one there, no sign of anyone, but the air felt different, cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. That's when the whistle came again, but this time it was right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing, just the emptiness of the hallway stretching out in both directions. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest as I scanned the hall, but there was no sign of anyone. No footsteps, no movement. The silence was deafening. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the spot where the sound had come from. I don't know how I managed to get back to the security booth, but I didn't turn around. When I checked the cameras, there was nothing. No one in the hallway, no movement, not even a hint of someone standing there. I've worked the night shift there ever since, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that something is watching me when I'm alone in those halls. And every now and then, when the night is still and the lights flicker, I swear I hear the whistle again, soft, distant, just on the edge of hearing, and I know that whatever it is, it's waiting for me to listen. Story 3, The Locked Door. I've always worked in places that were a little unconventional. This particular job was at an old, almost abandoned hospital on the edge of town. It had been out of commission for years, but they kept a skeleton crew around to keep the place secure. I was one of the night watchmen. My job was to patrol the building, make sure everything stayed locked up tight, and monitor the security cameras. Easy enough, or so I thought. The hospital was creepy, no other way to put it. It was a massive building, with long hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. The place was full of old equipment, abandoned rooms, and broken windows. Most of the time, it felt like I was walking through a ghost town. But one night, something happened that made me question everything. I was making my usual rounds, checking every floor, making sure all the doors were locked. Everything seemed normal at first. I checked the west wing, then moved down to the east wing. That's when I found it. The door, it was a storage room, one that had been locked for as long as I'd worked there. The key had been missing, and no one had been able to get inside. I'd walked past it 1,000 times, never thinking much of it. But that night, the door was open, just a crack, but enough for me to see the faint light spilling out from the inside. I froze. I knew it wasn't supposed to be open. No one else was supposed to be in that room, especially at this hour. My mind raced as I approached the door, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I pushed it open slowly, and the air that hit me was cold, colder than the rest of the building, like it had been sealed off for years. Inside was a room full of old medical equipment, just like I'd expected. But that wasn't what stopped me in my tracks. It was the man. He was standing in the corner of the room, his back to me, staring at the wall. He was dressed in a hospital gown, his hair wild and unkempt. He was pale, too pale, and I couldn't make out his features in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" I called, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless. I took a cautious step forward, calling out again. "Can I help you?" Still nothing. No movement. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of my own voice echoing in the room. I reached for the door to shut it behind me, but when I turned back to the man, he was gone. Just like that. No sound, no sign of him leaving, nothing. I checked every corner of the room, every piece of equipment, but he was nowhere to be found. I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe it was the isolation, the endless nights, the creepiness of the building getting to me. But when I turned to leave, I found something strange. A note on the ground, right at the foot of the door. I picked it up, my hand shaking, and read it. It simply said, "Help me. I don't know what to make of it." I went straight to the security room and checked the cameras. There was nothing, no sign of anyone entering or leaving the room, no footage of the man I saw standing there. It was like he had never been there at all. I tried to tell my supervisor, but he just brushed it off, saying the building had a lot of history and that I was probably seeing things. But I know what I saw. Every night since then, I've passed that door, and every time I can't shake the feeling that he's still there, waiting, staring at the wall, waiting for someone to listen. Story 4, The Shadow in the Hallway. I had worked the night shift at a local museum for over a year. The job was simple enough. Walk the halls, keep an eye on the exhibits, and make sure nothing was out of place. The museum itself was old, full of relics and artifacts from a time long gone. It wasn't unusual for me to spend hours walking alone through the dark hallways, surrounded by paintings and sculptures. But one night, something changed. It started out as a quiet evening, the usual routine. I checked the security cameras, made sure the doors were locked, and did a sweep of the main hall. Everything was fine until I passed the old wing. That's where the artifacts from ancient civilizations were kept. The room was dark, and the air felt colder than the rest of the building. But I thought nothing of it. I always felt a strange chill in that part of the museum, but it wasn't until later that I realized why. I was walking past the hallway when I saw it. A shadow. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a flicker from the overhead lamps. But as I walked closer, the shadow shifted. It wasn't a natural shadow, not like the ones cast by the lamps. This one was darker, deeper, and it seemed to move on its own, sliding across the floor like a figure in the dark. I stopped dead in my tracks. I stared at the shadow, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't belong there. It wasn't a reflection of anything, and there was no one else in the building. The security cameras didn't show anything unusual. Just me, walking alone. I took a few steps forward, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. But when I got closer to where the shadow had been, it was gone. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. But I didn't want to let it get to me. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a trick of the light. Maybe my imagination. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was standing near the ancient artifacts when I saw out of the corner of my eye a figure, a shadow, standing just beyond the doorway. It wasn't a person. It was more like a shape, a dark figure that seemed to melt into the darkness. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was watching me. I called out, but it didn't move. It just stood there frozen, watching. My heart raced as I reached for my radio. But when I turned back to look at the figure, it was gone, just vanished. I ran to the hallway, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone, no footsteps, no movement. I checked the security cameras again, but they showed nothing, just the empty hallway. As usual, no trace of the shadow, No sign of anyone entering or leaving. The thing that bothered me the most wasn't the shadow itself. It was the feeling, the overwhelming sense that something was in the museum with me, something ancient, something that had been there long before I ever stepped foot in that building. I tried to tell my supervisor, but he laughed it off. "It's just the building settling," he said. "You're fine. Nothing's going on." But I know what I saw, and every time I walk past that hallway now, I can feel that someone or something is watching me from the shadows, waiting